We have a phrase that we use here at Ellerslie. It's a very significant one. I think it's very defining for even the way we approach our Christianity, and it's watch what my God will do. It's a declaration of faith that when all seems to go dark, all seems to be impossible, that you're at that edge of the Red Sea and you have the Egyptian army coming against you. You have mountains on both sides, and of course you have a sea on the other. There's no escape. There's no way out, but you know God led you here. That's the time to make that declaration. Watch what my God will do. And you could say, who are you talking to? Well, you're talking to yourself. You're talking to the highest heaven, the lowest hell, anyone that wants to listen in. You're making a statement. And the story that we want to unpack is actually where that phrase came from in Ellerslie history. So did you want to sort of kick that off, Leslie, and just sort of give us some context?
Yeah, I think in the last episode, we were starting to talk about how God was basically saying it's time to move into a discipleship ministry. And we had a vision for discipleship ministry for a number of years. In fact, all the way back to before we were even married, when our families were just getting to know each other. We were good friends. But I remember a night, and it was 17 years before this time. We had gathered in my parents' house. Like, your family was there, my family was there. We had like lasagna or something. It was a fellowship night.
This is back like mid-90s,
yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, it was like before we were even married. But I remember it was like we kind of were having like a prayer time and encouragement time after dinner. And you had written out this vision for something that you had called Men of Honor. It was this vision of training 12 young men who wanted to really gain the foundation of successful, victorious, powerful Christianity.
It was handwritten.
Yeah, it was handwritten
on notebook paper.
Notebook paper. And it was like you read this vision that someday this was something that God had put on your heart that you wanted to do. And at the time you were young, like you were the same age as the men that you wanted to someday disciple. So it's kind of like what you wanted, what the school that you wished existed. But kind of having that vision that you would facilitate that or lead that someday way in the future. So our two families prayed over that vision and just sort of committed it to God. And I remember my dad like speaking these words of, encouragement, maybe prophetic. He's definitely not like a charismatic type, but he can say things that seem very profound and prophetic.
And they always turn out to be
he just has
too.
that gift of like, just knowing what God's doing and articulating that. And so he said that this is a vision that will happen in the future. And he just sort of spoke that life into the vision. And that had happened 17 years ago from this time. We had traveled, we had seen the insides of the church, we had seen the lack of discipleship, and we had even seen our own lack of discipleship through those years in ministry and having to go to the Word of God and wrestle through these truths to gain victory in so many different areas. And now we were at a place where God had called us off the road full time. We were no longer just out there speaking every week into huge audiences. We felt really prompted to this was the time that we were to begin a discipleship ministry. The problem was we really had no place to do this. We were living, and we still do, live in Colorado where property is very expensive. It's not easy to just sort of buy a piece of land and build a discipleship school. We had looked at lots of different options around the country and nothing was really sticking. The only thing we had kind of looked into a little bit was this kind of rundown little mini college campus that was in our hometown of Windsor, but you didn't even like it when you first saw it, and it just kind of looked like it needed a lot of repair and everything. And so we just didn't know where to go next, but God was really nudging us forward.
Yeah, so I mean, the story itself is actually probably book worthy, and I think what we want to do is just sort of skip like a rock along the surface because for this particular thing, I know you need to take off a little early, so I don't have a tremendous amount of time for this discussion, which either that means a part 2 in the future or we'll see. We'll see how.
Maybe hit the highlights at least.
We'll try and hit the highlights. So it's the significance of property, I think, has been very apparent to us. Like, because as a young couple, you can have a vision, but that vision without a place is a unique wrestling match. And we felt it. In fact, once we got the place, which we now know as Ellerslie, it impacted so deeply. The impact upon our discipleship, the effectiveness of what we're doing was marvelous. And so there's a battle, like in the heavenlies, over territory, over property. I think we could say that by walking through this. It was a very significant process for Ellerslie to land on its feet and actually gain the property that we have.
It was really looking for a place where the true remnant could gather together. And we had seen so many shallow Christians, but we had also seen those who truly had a passion to go all in for Jesus, go after Jesus with an undivided heart. And those were the people that people told us didn't exist, but we knew they existed. So the battle over the property was significant because it was actually a rallying point for those eager Christians that we knew were out there.
Yeah. So we had, like, you've given the measurement of 17 years. I want to say it was even because we got married in 94. It could have been like 92 or 93 when I wrote that down and we shared it as families, we prayed. And so, because I think it was like 2009 it was 2009 that we accessed the property. So there's 17 years in there. And in those 17 years, they're not like, just years that are passing and we like forget about this vision. No, we're very aware of this vision. And so somewhere in that, 2006, 2007, 2008 timeframe, you have this deep stirring that is like, we know we're supposed to move this forward. Lord, we need the property now. Okay, we've been praying for a long time, but we sense this pressing that God's like, now. We're like, well, but God, we're missing something. We're missing this property. So we begin to pray aggressively for property. And to just listen is the way we were trying to describe it. It's like, Lord, what do you want us to do? Because we don't have it. We don't have the money for it, but we sense the burden for it. So Lord, give us direction. So there was this property on the other side of Windsor, has a lake on it. Ironically, it is still there. But we really felt the burden. It's like, maybe that's it. And so we began to invest all of our praying into that property, that God would supernaturally enable us to purchase it, to access it, to build upon it. And the idea of building a campus when you have very little money and to get property in northern Colorado is almost just humorous, laugh out loud, ridiculous. And we knew that. We knew what we were aiming towards was actually in the impossible category. And that didn't bother us because we know that we serve an impossible God. And so the key for dealing with impossible things is you just sort of need to know it's God's idea. If it's God's idea, then it's going to happen. And it rarely, if ever, is going to happen the way you envision. And this definitely wasn't the way we envisioned it. And so we had certain things happening that were, like I said, this is skipping like a rock along the water, where we had an investor that came in and was willing to actually buy the property we're on now for us. And so I know we're skipping a little to say, I thought you didn't like the property at first. And it's true.
I think we sort of came to grips with the fact that it was this or nothing.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a lot of other possibilities.
And to build one is such a significant thing. And it cost more to build one from ground zero than to take over this one.
Thought, we'll fix it up. It's going to be a lot of work, but we'll fix it up.
So then I think what happens when you begin to move towards that intellectually is you bond to it. So I think we begin to bond to the property. And I think this was at the time when we snuck onto the property at night during the rainstorm. Is that right?
Sounds very underhanded.
It does.
We didn't sneak. We just...
No one was on the campus.
We just drove up to the campus and took a walk around it. I don't think it was really sneaking. We didn't own it at the time, so I guess theoretically we were trespassing, but no one cared.
So it was pouring rain, and I remember there was a gazebo in between the chapel and the lake house at the time. And so we stood under that gazebo in the pouring rain, and we just felt so burdened that God was saying, this is the property. So obviously there's some process that went inside of us. We stopped praying for the other property. We said, okay, Lord, take all that prayer and direct it like a laser beam into this property. And we started to actually see the virtue in the property. I mean, it's funny how you can look at something the first time and you don't like it. It doesn't match your taste. And then suddenly God gives you a heart for it. And we started to get a heart for this campus. And I remember looking at the chapel building and I prayed this prayer. Lord, I pray that in that building, you would raise up the next generation of Hudson Taylors and Amy Carmichaels. And I've come back to that prayer so many times to realize the true transformative, life-changing power that has been revealed in that one building, and how many both young and old Christians have encountered the living God on their face in that building. And so it's a profound thing to just sort of think back. But at that time, it seemed so preposterous in the natural realm. And so we prayed and we prayed. We would take walks along the Poudre Trail, and at the Poudre Trail at a certain juncture, you can see this campus across a couple lakes. And so you can see it in the distance, and we would pray from that point for the campus. We'd take purposeful walks just to get to that point and stop and pray aggressively for God to make a way where there seems to be no way. And so I think I mentioned that there was an investor that came into the picture that was desirous for us to have the property. I mean, whoa, God, you're answering prayer. I mean, this is amazing. And so we negotiated with the owner at the time, which was the Bible college that was originally here, that had sort of gone bankrupt, and they were trying to sell off their assets. And so we had a handshake deal. Now, any of you that are in real estate know that you should probably make that handshake deal more, put it on paper and, do some signatures on it.
Well, we were planning on doing all that. We've been traveling and hadn't had a chance to do it.
Town, and so we had a handshake deal. It was set, it was defined, and there was really no one else interested in the property. They were just as happy to sell to us as we were to actually get the property. And so everything looked great. We went off on a vacation to Southern California. And, we're just sort of beaming with the potential. We've been praying. We saw God faithful. Isn't this amazing? And I got a call from the president of the college when we were down there. And they said, hey, Eric, I just wanted to give you a heads up that someone else turned in a formal offer on the campus. And the board is set to vote on it in the morning, but it looks like it's, around 5 or 6 a.m. tomorrow. We will actually be accepting that offer. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Don't we have a deal? It's like, well, we have a handshake deal, and this is a formal deal. And according to real estate law, a formal offer actually trumps a handshake deal. And I remember saying something like, well, where I come from, a handshake deal is enough to seal it forever and always. And so he was... I
have a feeling that the other offer was probably better than what we were offering. So it's probably had a lot of reasons.
I have a hunch that it was too. And so, it was a tough situation for them probably, in the integrity side, but also for us. I mean, just this young couple who's been praying. We have this faith. We're seeing God come through after all these years, because at that point it had been about 14 years that we'd been praying. And so now suddenly we see the breakthrough, and then we see it die right in front of us. I still remember that night, the wrestling match in my soul. And it was a letting go, as we've called, that Isaac Moriah moment where you lay down something that's very precious to you and you give it to God. And sometimes, I don't want to say this is a pattern that always is a part of every ministry vision, because I can't speak for every ministry vision, but I know it's a part of a lot. And that is that God will bring you to a place where he has to separate the vision from you separate it from your grip to make sure it's in God's grip. And this was that key moment for us where we had to die to the vision. I think it's typically called death to the vision in so many different ministry stories. And wow, it's not a pleasant process to walk through, but a very, very significant one for us. And I think we looked back and we thought about where we were at that 14-year point of prayer. And then where we were going to be at the 17-year point when it all is going to come together. And we're like, thank you, Lord. Thank you for...
What happened was, over the next few years, the person who had bought the property made it beautiful. They were having like a wedding business on the campus. So they wanted to make it really elegant and planted all these flowers and landscaped and fixed the buildings and everything that we wanted to do to it. They probably did it better.
That we wouldn't have had money for.
Right.
And they invested hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into this property.
So 2 or 3 years later, was it through 2 years later or 3? I'm not as good with years as you are, but when we found out that it was, maybe you should tell the story, but by that time, it was actually a really beautiful property.
Yeah. So we had, sort of died to the process over and over again. You know how it'll flit into your brain again. You're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's painful. We almost had that. Because I don't know if I can't remember what we were doing during that time, if we switched back to prayed for the other property again. But
I actually don't remember either.
I can't remember. That's
I know
a blur.
we were kind of still in the back of our mind, hoping we'd get the campus one day and just praying for God to show us what to do next.
Well, it was hard for us because what we wanted to use the campus for was to build the kingdom of heaven. And what was used in the campus was a wedding business. And it's like, no, I love weddings. I think they're great. But this wasn't like some even Christian wedding business. This was just a wedding business. It's like, dear Lord, this doesn't seem right. And we were down in Southern California again. I know that was a common
We used to go down
tradition.
there as a tradition, and we don't anymore. But they had this one place near the ocean that our kids loved to go. So that was in the winter. We would always go there.
So we'd always have this. It was our yearly sort of where we'd survey our life, our ministry, our calling, and we would pray about it the whole time we were down there. It was always a very special time. And when we were down there that time, we both had the sense that we needed to freshly pursue the campus when we arrived home. And so this is, I'm guessing, somewhere around 2008, early 2009. So we arrived back home with that burden that we're supposed to pursue the campus. And this is the old school voice message systems, like we're attached to your phone and you'd see a bleeping light and you'd click on it and it would give a message. Seems weird that we...
No, I feel like it was voicemail
you think
on
it
the
was?
phone, on like an iPhone, but maybe
I just have a mental picture of the bleeping thing.
I think that
It's
was
sort of
a
funny.
little bit before this time that the
I
answering
don't know.
machines
Some
existed.
a genius that knows tech history could probably answer that for us. But one of the messages that was waiting for us, whether it was on a voice, message machine or whether it was in our voicemail, was get on your knees quickly, Eric and Leslie, because the campus is coming up for sale.
As someone who knew we had been praying for it had found out that the people who owned it wanted to sell it. So she was like, you better pray because it's going to be available soon. And we still didn't have money to just go buy it. So
in fact, I would say we were in a weaker spot practically, but we felt we were supposed to go after the campus. And so I might jumble up some of the order of things. I want to say, and you can correct me if you remember better, that we had another investor that came in. So we were going to pursue the campus to purchase it. And right as we were at the point ready to transact, I remember I was driving through Loveland. It's just a very vivid memory in my mind. And driving through Loveland, I remember exactly where I was. There was a Starbucks off to my right. There was a Panera off to my right. And then there was a Chipotle off to my left. And it's like, I know exactly where I was. And I remember him saying he just feels like he can't go through with this. He just, he feels like he needs to pull out. So everything that we were moving forward, again, it's this fresh vision, this fresh momentum. And then suddenly he pulls out. And this is at this exact point, as I'm driving by Panera, staring at Panera, just not because I had a reason to, but just that's where my eyes were when I said this. I made a declaration in my soul because I knew what the enemy was trying to say to me. It's like, you see, you trust in your God and he's gonna fail you. I knew what the enemy was trying to con me with. And so that was when I made the declaration. First time I'd ever said these words, watch what my God will do. And it was a declaration of faith. I know God is going to come through. And even though it seemed like everything once again was falling to pieces, it was like to stand our ground. God is leading us. He has led us this far. He doesn't miscarry his ideas. He doesn't miscarry his vision for our life. Let's just hold on. And so even though our circumstances don't look strong, he still is strong. So that was a key defining moment, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And so instead of being able to buy the property, I remember you went to the owner who was trying to sell it. He really wanted to sell it, but he didn't have, buying a commercial property is not that easy. It was expensive. It was complicated. And not that many people can use a campus with dorms and things like that. So he didn't have like a ton of people lining up to buy it, but he still really wanted to sell it. And you offered to lease it from him because it was all we could really swing financially. And even that was a step of faith because we didn't have this investor forking over a lot of money to put down on it. We just had to stand in faith that we would have enough coming in every month as we obeyed what God had called us to do, that we could lease the property. He did not want to lease it. He wanted to sell it. So we went back and forth on that.
Our conversation went something like this. I can lease it. He goes, you can buy it. I go, I can lease it. And he goes, you can buy it. And we went back and forth on that for quite a while. And finally he agreed to lease to us it was the dorms, right?
Yeah, just the dorms.
It was the dorms. So everything, what we would say, sort of like southeast of the bridge, which is everything north of that bridge is like the functional part of a campus, like the chapel, the administrative building, the classroom building. It's like, yeah, you sort of need that as where the kitchen functionality would be. And so the dorms have nothing but rooms in them. And so, but okay, I'll take it. And so I agreed to that. And and it's hard to explain this, but I knew that he was going to allow us to lease the whole thing. But we actually started marketing Ellerslie at that exact time when all we had was dorms, and he refused to lease the northern portion of the campus, which is, like I said, the functional part of a college campus.
Well, there was no place to hold any classes or teach anything, and people were signing up for our first semester. It was a 12-week semester at that time. We do 5 weeks now, but people were signing up, and our board was saying, you're getting really close to your start date, and all you have are the dorms. You're probably going to have to come up with some sort of plan, like a tent or something outside of the dorms where you can hold your classes, because what are you going to do? And you just had this faith he will let us access the whole campus.
It's like I knew it. I knew that I knew that I knew. And it's a strange thing. I think that's when I began to realize that I have a certain gift spiritually, and it's faith. I have faith. I know that this is going to happen. And there were quite a few people looking at me incredulously. I don't think that was, well, you were one of them, but it was a unique stretch of time because it got down to, what was it, days?
Yeah, I think it was the day before the students arrived that finally the breakthrough happened.
Yeah. And he came to us and said, okay, I'll lease you the northern lot.
So I think we signed the papers for that, and it was still just a lease, but at least we could use the rest of the campus. And I think we still had to share it with the weddings that were happening for a while.
They had weddings on Friday night and Saturdays.
We couldn't go into the chapel on those nights. So it was a little complicated, but at least we had a place, and we had people signing up. And it was the day before we started and day before we had our very first Ellerslie banquet that we signed the papers to access the rest of it. So definitely cutting it very close, but seeing the faithfulness of God.
God loves that 11:59 and 59-second time frame. And yet, wow, the profundity of God's ways to us. I mean, this is just the beginning of the story of the campus too, because we own it now. And yet even that dimension, which we don't have time to go into, has been a profound picture. And like one thing that could be fascinating in an upcoming episode is to just talk about money in ministry and faith in regards to money, because God has tested us on that front. This is a classic picture of it. Even to sign that lease is like, this is like a simple way of saying it. I don't want to overcomplicate it because most people don't know how much it costs to do the type of thing that we do. But it was sort of like buying a really nice Mercedes-Benz every month, cash.
And just praying and standing in faith that God would supply. Because most people who do something of this size, even though what we do is fairly small compared to a lot of ministries, running a campus and feeding people for 5 weeks and all that, you have like a big denomination or a sponsor backing you up, like a church that is behind it. And we didn't have any of that. So it was definitely, even just signing the papers, it was like a miracle every single month. But one thing that I think would be really good to finish with is the story of the first Ellerslie banquet, because we had been through all of this like wrestling match and seeing God come through, dying to the vision, then seeing him bring it back and do it in such a beautiful, miraculous way. And now we had, I think it was 44 for our first
55.
So we had, but it was funny because we had had a very easy time attracting female students, but not as easy attracting male students back in the day. So we had 44 women, I think, and it was 12
It
guys.
must have been 56. Yeah, it was 56, 44 women, 12 guys.
And it was really interesting to realize that your vision 17 years ago had been 12 men. Now the vision had expanded to women and men, but how God even used the number 12 for the first semester of guys
was
to
really
hallmark
special.
the vision. And we had been through all sorts of spiritual warfare leading into that opening banquet, not just wrestling for the campus, but we had 4 children under the age of 5. We had had loads of just circumstantial issues. And one of the things that happened was our basement flooded, like our septic in our house. Our septic had backed up. This was like a few weeks before the start of Ellerslie, and we were like displaced. We were living in a hotel for a few days. Our kids were all sick. It was just a total mess, but we knew it was spiritual warfare. But I remember these guys with like full-on hazmat suits had to come and decontaminate our basement, and our basement was like half of our house. Like all of our kids' rooms were down there, and so it was a finished basement, and we just had a ranch. So it was like the upper level, and the basement was kind of like the lower level of the house. They had taken all of our stuff, like all of our bins, all of our belongings, everything we had, and just made huge piles of them. There was no rhyme or reason, and we were going to be needing to spend a few weeks like reorganizing everything. But you had the idea that opening banquet, you were going to find that paper that you had read to our 2 families 17 years before that had the vision for this Men of Honor school, and we hadn't looked at it in years, and you knew it was there. And I was like, you are never going to find that. Look at the amount of stuff just piled floor to ceiling. Like, how are we going to? It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And we prayed, and the first like bin lid that you lifted up, the paper was right there.
It was actually the second row. So I moved aside a row. It was like, okay, Lord, lead me to this needle in a haystack. I moved aside one row, took a bin off, opened the next bin down, and literally it was laying on top of that.
So even that was like such a hallmark of God's
The way that God speaks to us in those times, and that was just such a language for the two of us, even though other people might be like, well, why is that a big deal? But it was just God sort of saying, this was me. I'm behind this. Even the 3 years in between where you had to wrestle with why God and the death to the vision. And there's so many other factors to this that God walked us through. If we go into the granular side, God was forming us, our faith, because he knew we needed faith for this venture. You don't just need the word of God. You don't just need to have some understanding of truth. You need to have the character and the faith to sort of underpin it, to be able to stand in the winds of what ministry brings. And so it was a gift.
And reading that, I think you read that paper, that vision statement at the first banquet, and it was such a incredible picture of everything we were launching at Ellerslie was on that paper. So to see how God, when he plants those seeds, those desires, those burdens, he does fulfill them in his own perfect time and way, and in a beautiful way when we trust those things to him. And I remember you were up there in the front reading this vision, looking out at this group that had come for the first semester, just had gotten the full access to the campus the day before, and just seeing the faithfulness of God in the midst of such a battle. And you were really emotional. You started crying. And Hudson, who's our oldest, who's now 20 years old, but he was 4 at the time, or 5. He was 5. And he was like, okay, this is an awkward moment. Daddy's up there with a microphone, crying into the microphone, and there's this whole room full of people, and I need to go like make everything better. So he went up to stand next to Daddy, who was crying, and he looked at the audience and kind of shrugged, like, I don't know why he's crying.
What's wrong with my dad.
I'm here though. I'm here just so you know. It was really, really cute. So he was even a part of it, but it was a very special night, and it wasn't the end of all the battles over the campus, but it was definitely a very significant step, and feeling like that breakthrough had finally come.
And it was the first significant fulfillment to that phrase, watch what my God will do. And then it's like, there it is. We're staring at it right now. This is what God does when you trust him. The key for us is to not buy all the noise that the enemy tries to put up there of like, it's impossible, it's impossible, it's impossible. And to just have a resolute faith in the midst of those impossibilities. If God is leading, he will deliver on his end. And so our job is to stand on our end, which is to be believers.